Welcome to Bake to the Future. The wholesale baking industry mixes tradition and innovation to feed the world and the economy, generating some major dough while employing nearly 800,000 people in the U.S. We bring you a fresh take on the latest trends and issues impacting the baking sector through exclusive insights and conversations. Brought to you by the American Bakers Association, who will take you bake to the future.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Haley Blumenreich.
And I'm Katie Toole.
And today we are looking at the results from the 2020 election and what they mean for the baking industry. Part of ABA's mission is to work with policymakers to ensure a more receptive environment for bakers. That means tracking, advocating, and communicating with those on Capitol Hill, in the White House, and at government agencies.
And you can follow any news source you want, but the only place you're going to get an analysis of the elections as it pertains to the baking industry is right here with ABA and on Bake to the Future. We have three of our in-house political and governmental experts with us today to help us understand how the election results will impact the key policy areas important to the baking industry and our members, such as nutrition, workforce, COVID-19, just to name a few. We have Robb MacKie, President and CEO, Lee Sanders, Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs, and Kelly Knowles, Vice President of Political and State Affairs. Welcome, everybody, all together.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Robb, Lee, and Kelly have been with ABA in the advocacy world for quite some time, so I'm looking forward to hearing their perspective on the changing over of administration and everything else we have going on today. But first, Haley, we have a question for the group.
Yes. So, we've had you all on before, so we already know your favorite baked goods, but we have to ask our Great Bake Debate, which this time is a Thanksgiving edition. And first, I want to let everyone know that you have to stick around till the end of the show to hear the results from our last debate about oatmeal cookies and raisins and chocolate chips. But this episode, our question is, what Thanksgiving baked good could you not live without? Cheese or a dip and crackers, or stuffing and dressing, or pie?
Well, I'll go. This is Kelly. I would say my grandmother's cornbread dressing.
Yum.
And this is Lee. I would say the same thing. I do that. And I also make a second dressing. It's an emerald recipe with oysters. So an oyster dressing as well.
All right, Robb.
Well, I love a good oyster stuffing, like nobody's business, but I have to have, perfect apple pie, homemade apple pie. So I'm going to go with apple pie for Thanksgiving.
All right. I like this. It kind of sets up the conversation well. We have a divided panel. We'll have maybe a divided government. Kind of, sets us up this way. Yeah, I mean, and I also have a question, it's probably a whole other Great Bake Debate question about stuffing versus dressing and which one is better. Stuffing goes in the bird, dressing does not, anyway, we could go on and on. But
ooh, you're getting technical on us.
Yeah. And then I think, Kelly, when we were talking earlier, you were talking about dressing. Sometimes it's a little bit too goopy and sometimes it gets a little crustier. Anyway. I think
you're right. The dressing and stuffing debate really is regional. A lot of Southerners call it dressing and the rest of the country calls it stuffing. Or at least that's how we see it in the South.
Yeah, but stuffing technically has to go in the bird because it's stuffed. Yeah. Anyway.
I wasn't going to say, but I do not know what dressing is, but I'm learning as we go here.
the girl from Maryland, it's a little bit too far north. Yeah.
But, now that I know it's a regional thing.
The only dressing I know is Miracle Whip.
Oh,
another Marylander.
So that means they're from the northern part.
In the food safety debate, they definitely say that dressing, the Southerners have it right.
Oh, okay. All right. So, this is a whole other podcast. Okay. So to completely change gears and to get a little bit more serious for a minute, we're recording right now on Friday, November 13th. The last time we were in the office at ABA was on Friday, March 13th. A lot has happened since then, not least of which is the federal and state elections in the United States. So a lot of questions I'm sure we hope to tackle today that, we have our list that we're going to kind of run through, talk through. But what are some of the biggest questions you've been getting from members during this time? Why don't we start with Rob?
Thank you, Katie. I just think, just to touch on the election for a moment, only in 2020 will we be in this sort of overtime situation. And, while we think the outcome is clear, just like everything else with 2020, there's still some, confusion around it. So to be determined. But anyway, the questions that we're getting are around, sort of that I'm getting anyway from the members is around the economy. And, what's the tax and regulatory position going to be of a potential Biden administration? Is it going to be a redo of the Obama administration? And I personally think that's probably a good signpost, if you will. But, most of it is around getting the economy going so that we can have the fastest, most robust economic recovery, which will be the greatest, most important recovery from the COVID pandemic.
I've been getting questions about what does this mean on the regulatory front? How will the agenda and the priorities change between a Trump administration and a Biden administration? I think one of the things that come to mind is enforcement and inspections. I think that's something that across all the agencies we can expect to see some differences in the way business is reviewed. And I think that is something that's certainly impactful, and we need to help our members prepare.
All right. Thanks, Lee. And Kelly, where you say you're the director of the American Bakers PAC, and you're also the head of ABA State Affairs, so you probably have slightly different questions coming your way.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think about 2 years ago when we implemented our state affairs advocacy resource for ABA members, that's really come to the forefront for a lot of folks in terms of what do the state elections mean on the state level with all of the different legislative and regulatory challenges that we're facing there. And so whether it's Prop 65, independent contractor reclassification, a lot of questions about what do the results on the election front mean for these state-by-state issues.
Well, I'm really looking forward to getting more into those state issues, especially since, we could be looking at a divided government. Could you guys maybe tell us about, the current state of the Senate, the U.S. Senate, and what it might mean for the federal government in D.C.?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this. And certainly, Kelly's a lot closer to it than I am, so I'm curious on her perspective. But, as we know, there's two Senate seats in Georgia that are going to go to a runoff. That runoff election will be January 5th. And right now, the balance of power in the Senate is 50 Republican senators and 48 Democratic senators or independents that caucus with the Democrats. With a Biden administration, in order for the balance of power to shift and the Republicans to maintain the majority, they're going to have to get one, if not both of those Georgia seats. Why is this important? Because I think it will be determinative to the entire Biden agenda. Big picture items that were talked about during the campaign, the Green New Deal, repealing the Trump tax cuts, a whole bunch of regulatory issues, the PRO Act, which is, really a major rewrite of our labor laws and employment laws in this country. All of that hinges on the outcome of those two Georgia seats.
Yeah, I'd add, this is Lee, Rob's absolutely right. That Senate Georgia, those runoffs are so important. Those are January 5th. The start of the new 117th Congress is actually January 3rd. And so that's obviously before inauguration, which is January 20th. So Vice President Pence will still be in the seat as needed at the Senate. And then also it'll be really interesting to see the timing of the governor's appointment in California for the Harris seat. So it will be, kind of pivotal, some of these things that could be happening and going through the Senate in very early January.
Well, from a political standpoint, I would add, too, as we were presenting this week to one of ABA's professional groups, I think it was the Human Resources Committee who got together. And one of the points that we discussed was with this, possible divided government, if Republicans hold, as Rob said, at least one seat in Georgia, President Biden would be the first president in over 100 years, the first Democrat president, to start his term without a Democrat-controlled Senate. So I think the last president to do so was Grover Cleveland over 100 years ago. So really going to be determining of the future who holds the Senate. Everything will happen and we'll know January 5th, hopefully.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add there is if the Republicans hold the Senate, the Congressional Review Act is something that will potentially come into play. One of the first things that usually a new president will do is look at all the activity in the agencies from the previous administration. They're likely to want to postpone effective dates of rules, hold off on moving forward with rulemakings, perhaps have some legal challenges to rules from the previous administration. And so the balance of that power in the Senate will make a difference in how those activities happen or don't happen.
What are some rules then you think could be in play that would be affected, from our members' perspectives?
Well, I think probably right at the top of the list is maybe the independent contractor rule from the Department of Labor that had just recently been proposed. We expect that they'll finalize that before January 20th. And so that's a very recent change. I think that some others, from the FDA standpoint, I think that all those things will probably continue to move forward. But I think the prioritization of those, which ones raised to the top of the list, may change. That's something that could happen at all the different agencies.
And can you maybe talk about what you all are expecting as a new presidential administration is coming in? How does that kind of work? What does it look like when you're interfacing with representatives in the government on the key issues that you're tracking? How does that work when a new government comes in, a new administration comes in?
Yeah, I'll kick this off, and then certainly would love to get Leah and Kelly's perspective. When you have a change in administration, it does take some time to get. You've got a lot of, I think, 4,000 political appointees, and as we saw in the previous administration, it took a long time, to get all the folks in the right seats. Obviously, the focus now is at the top level with cabinet secretaries, but then we can't, understate or overstate rather the importance of the deputy secretaries for the different departments. It just takes a little bit of time. My main concern, and what we've already started to communicate, to the Biden transition team is, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and we have, certainly the food and beverage industry has done a phenomenal job, of continuing to make sure that we have all the government structure, rules, and things in place that allow us to continue to feed the country. And we've not, there've been hiccups, but by and large, we've not skipped a beat. All of that, we need to maintain that infrastructure, if you will, through the winter, during the transition period. And so, that's probably going to be our top priority. And we're strongly communicating to the Biden team that at least in the interim period, that we need to keep the regulatory structure, the enforcement structure in place. And as we've seen, I think there's going to be peaks and valleys in terms of, outbreaks. And we're certainly seeing, a significant increase around the country. So all the more important to protect those essential workers in our industry so that our members can continue to feed the country.
Yeah, one thing that I would add, the infrastructure that we put in place with the broad food industry, the Food and Beverage Issue Alliance, and then a broader group that was developed for the COVID response, that original FBIA structure was put in place during the Obama administration as a platform for communications, for us to talk about the priorities of the food industry and to partner with federal agencies. And that worked really well. During the Obama administration, they asked us to expand that from just nutrition issues to also food safety issues and beyond. And so certainly having that infrastructure in place during the COVID pandemic has been really wonderful, in that we already had a great relationship, a good working relationship with those agencies. We've expanded upon that. And certainly during the Trump administration. And I think it's so important, as Robb said, for us to continue on with that momentum. And we've gotten very positive feedback from the agencies that they want to do that. And so I think it's just a matter of looking at the new priorities for a new administration, and then, the industry having our strategy and looking at what are the priorities, what do we want to accomplish over the next 4 years.
Well, and if you want to jump in with a little political perspective on that too, you look at President-elect Biden, there'll be a big focus on his first 100 days. And so what kind of political goodwill will be floating around Washington, D.C. then, which is, everyone has an opinion about. I think that, it'll be interesting to see how President Biden operates. He's a legislator. He comes from the legislative branch, obviously as a senator, and doesn't have that executive governor experience. And so he likes to make deals. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what kind of mood sets in Washington over the first 100 days. Will there be an opportunity for compromise and unity? Or, will it be just a continuation of what we've seen over the last 4 years, which is a very polarized landscape?
I would add, Kelly, to that, say what you will about Joe Biden. He is very much an institutionalist. And I would expect, he was very much a defender of the traditions and the institutions in the Senate. I would expect that he will do the same thing with the office of the presidency, where, he might, roll back some things, but get back to, sort of an original understanding of what that office does. And I think that might bode well to some of the things that we hear about with regard, to the filibuster and the nuclear option, which is very much an inside the Beltway concept. But in terms of the governing of the Senate, it's everything.
Right. Well, and then there was something the other day that I read about, the back and forth between executive orders. Are we going to get into this rhythm where presidents are just, revoking and reissuing executive orders? And Lee and Robb can speak to that a lot better than me. But in terms of just a ton of regulatory rollback and regulatory relief that was implemented in the Trump administration, it'll be very interesting to see what's changed in that very early part of the Biden administration in terms of regulatory action.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kelly. And just for historical reference, during the Obama administration, they issued 295 executive orders, and 19 of those were during the first 100 days. So I think they'll certainly they'll use that that tool, and we'll have to see where they go with that.
Yeah, I think as we're looking ahead to sort of drill in a little bit more on policy, I think it's wise, and we've been spending a lot of time, certainly over the last couple of months, looking at the food agenda, the nutrition agenda for one of the Obama administration, and I think it's a good lesson to go back and take a look at some of those because I think we'll see all of those coming back in one form or another. We sort of forget about, we had Michelle Obama was the head, essentially of food policy and the fight against obesity. But, things like, restricting advertising to children, things like food taxes and soda taxes, things like, front of pack, stop sign labeling. I could go on and on, ingredients, changing the way FDA approves ingredients that are generally recognized as safe. So I think in the food space. And it's interesting because there's been a fundamental philosophy shift. This administration has been, very free market oriented, at least in our space. One could argue on the tariffs, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but at least in the food and nutrition and in general regulation, I mean, they did the rollback 2-for-1 regulation, and they were serious about it. And they went back and rolled back a lot of regulations, and they wanted to give industries the chance really to self-regulate. And nothing could have been more polar opposite than the Obama-Biden administration, where they looked down their nose at quote unquote big food as a cause of obesity and a cause of health issues, so on and so forth. And so I just think it's going to be wise to take a look back and see what of the Obama agenda that they didn't get done or didn't get rolled back that they're going to pursue in the coming 2 to 4 years.
So what are some of those things that may have been left on the table from the Obama administration that Biden administration might pick back up?
Well, I think that certainly over at FDA that food safety, FSMA, was a priority. That continues to be so. And I think with the new blueprint for a new era of food safety with a focus on traceability, innovation, partnership, I think that will continue forward. I'd be surprised if it didn't. I think that some of the nutrition innovation strategy elements will move forward. And but the priority of those may change. So certainly I think that the sodium reduction voluntary targets, that guidance will move to the top of the list. I think there'll be a review of added sugar, healthy definition, potentially a natural definition. I think, as Rob had mentioned earlier, user fees are something that typically in a Democratic administration we see generally recognized as safe. Label transparency is another one. And thinking about environmental impacts and chemicals in food are something that I think we need to watch out for. I also think, looking at maybe the tug of war on who would have jurisdiction over biotech. Cultured meat isn't something that impacts the baking industry, except it's something you put on a bun. And so, but we could see a shift in who is responsible for biotech policy moving forward, from moving that from USDA to FDA. The other thing I'd mention is, one of the Biden priorities that we keep hearing about is racial health disparity. And so where, we know that they're going to go back and review any changes to the Affordable Care Act, I think they're also going to look at food and nutrition policy as a preventative for healthcare. And so I think a lot of the nutrition programs will be under review. There was so much work there in the Obama administration. I think that some of the flexibility that we saw during the Trump administration will probably be reviewed.
Yeah, I want to jump in. Lee mentioned something really important. If folks may forget that under the Food Safety Modernization Act, there was registration fees for facilities, including distribution centers. And in the original bill, we worked with our Senate allies to get some flexibility around covering distribution centers, but we weren't able to get the registration fees taken out, although we were able to fight them every year of the Obama administration. And that was, what was about $50,000 per facility that would have to be filed, basically a user fee, from bakers to the federal government. It was capped out at about $250,000 or $300,000. And I think it's important that a lot of this is going to be couched in terms of, revenue enhancement for the federal treasury. We've spent more money in the last year than we probably spent in a decade. And so there's going to be enormous pressure, on the Biden administration to try to recoup any way they can, particularly if there's resistance on repealing the tax provisions. So I think, things like user fees, particularly the registration fee that we saw as a result of FSMA under the Obama administration, that's going to be a renewed fight. I also think this is going to have a huge impact at the state level And I know Kelly has been working and tracking this very carefully, where we expect, again, given the budget impact of COVID on state and local governments, and there's relief moving through Congress on that, but I think they're going to be at their own devices on revenue raisers. So Kelly's probably got a much better sense than I do of where she sees that shaking out.
Well, you're right. I mean, so many states. I mean, when you've got a state like Kansas that is running a multi-million-dollar deficit, it's across the country, the strain that COVID has put on our states across the country. And so in terms of outlook, in fact, the State Affairs Working Group is actually getting together next week to set planning priorities for 2021. And I think a lot of us are trying to figure out what are these revenue-raising tools that states are going to implement. And I'd focus on the packaging side. I think we're going to see a lot of restrictive packaging measures pass in the states, potentially with some kind of per pack tax on manufacturers. And so we're trying to stay ahead of that as much as possible. We were successful in defeating a very onerous bill in California earlier this summer that literally died by 4 votes in the middle of the night in California, but would have just given Cal EPA sweeping authority to impose all kinds of revenue raising opportunities that business would pay for. And so we no doubt will see that again next year, maybe in some different version, but also in other states. New Jersey just passed a very restrictive packaging measure. And so it's important that bakers stay engaged on this issue.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add, whether it's on a federal or a state level, our industry has invested so much money with some of these new regulations, like the nutrition facts label and those revisions, those changes. And I think the new folks coming in, the new administration may not be aware of the partnership, of the investment, of the time, of the resources that we've spent. It's going to be really important for ABA to communicate, to educate, and then to make recommendations as we move forward across the board.
Yeah, I think on that front, we had, it was sort of an eye-opening conversation yesterday, myself and a bunch of our colleagues in the food and ag space with former Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, who has been advising the Biden transition. And, while we know all the incredible things that we have done collectively to keep, the food supply safe and stable throughout the pandemic, his advice to us was don't assume that the incoming administration is aware of any of that. And so a lot of conversation around even things that we might take for granted. We're going to have to do a lot of education and re-education with the new folks that are coming in. And so, it was to me a little bit of a warning shot, if you will, that we're going to have to redouble our efforts. And a lot of it will depend on like we talked early on, who gets what seats within the new government. But regardless of who that is, we're going to have really significantly stepped up outreach. And we're going to really have to rely on the members, the ABA members, that is, to help us push those messages, give us the data, the information that we need in order to be effective.
And our members, this is Katie again, our members have been tremendously active over the last year, not only feeding the country, but also working with ABA to help provide us information so then we can help tell our story and our industry story to lawmakers and regulators. But they've also been really active in the Political Action Committee this year, and that's changed quite a bit, right, Kelly?
Well, that's right. I'm glad you brought that up, Katie. I mean, American Bakers PAC, which is really our political advocacy tool at ABA to influence elections and hopefully put the right legislators in office that we can work with on these key priorities. We historically send a lot of our PAC checks back to our members to present back in the field, in the district, in the state where they have operations. And this year, because of the situation with the pandemic and a lot of facilities are closed to visitors, we had to punt and do something different. And so we have implemented kind of a digital campaign season, like all the other folks who are operating PACs and running for Congress and running for office. And so over the last 30 days leading up to the election, we held over 40 Zooms with candidates and members of Congress and brought ABA PAC members into the fold for terrific discussions we weren't sure how it was going to go, but I think it was a huge success. And we were able to bring in all of our partners, our members in the districts and the states, when we met with a member of Congress or a candidate. And so a lot of great discussion, a lot of good FaceTime, and some really strong ROI on those PAC investments.
I would say that, we did an amazing job pivoting the industry despite, and let's not forget, we have a significant portion of our industry that is really struggling now. Those bakers and suppliers that are in the food service channel, they're coming back slowly, but they've taken a huge hit that's going to probably take them several years to recover from. So just a huge shout out to the industry for continuing to support the political resources. But I have to tell you, some of the fun events, we totally shifted. We've never done an event on a campaign bus before, or a campaign van. And, we had just had a great conversation with Susan Collins from Maine as she was on her campaign bus barnstorming through Maine. We were talking to Henry Cuellar, out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And it just really, I think we made the best of it. And I think we'll have some really strong memories coming out of this whole experience.
Yeah, I would just say, too, from my perspective, Rob, and I know you agree, and you too, Lee, that, it's been hard over the last, as Katie said in the beginning of this broadcast, March 13th has really been the last time we've seen each other, except for a few strategic times, but missing the ABA membership. I mean, I miss our members. We've got the greatest members. I tell my peers in Washington that all the time. And so being able to see their faces on Zoom and interact and have these meetings with key lawmakers, like you said, whether they're on a campaign bus or running between campaign town halls, it was really great and motivating for me to be able to see the ABA members and see them engaged in the process.
I'm wondering from each of you, kind of a lightning round question here as we start to wrap up. What are some of the keys to the industry's success for the next few years? So some things that won't change, or, just any sort of things that you see as the keys to our industry success over the next few years. Again, I'll start with Rob.
Well, I think it all starts with member engagement, which you talked about. We absolutely rely heavily on our subject matter experts. As great as the ABA team is, it's the subject matter experts, whether it's on food safety or human resources issues or environmental sustainability, whatever those issues are, it really comes down to the industry subject matter experts. And we're going to need them more than we've ever had because we need data. We need, solutions, practical solutions, workarounds. And then on some things, there will probably be some lines in the sand that will be drawn. I go back, 12 years and we had the card check issue that was one of the first priorities of the Obama administration. And we were able to rally the industry. I don't know if it'll be card check or anything else, but, there's going to be some issues that we can work with the Biden administration and Congress, but there's going to be some line in the sand issues. So that engagement, whether it's to make a proposal better and effective for the industry or whether it's to, kind of put up the stop sign and try to keep some bad things from happening to the industry is all going to come down to that membership engagement across the board.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Now, just like last time, Lee, you're next.
Yeah, I would agree with Rob in that engagement is key. And the great thing is because we represent the entire industry, we can paint that picture about how different proposals would impact various types of members, large companies, small companies, food service, and regional companies, multinational companies. And so I think that education effort for a bunch of new folks, new politicals that are here will be very important, and building those relationships. We're very lucky that we have a great infrastructure in place, and by leading the Food and Beverage Issue Alliance with over 60 trade organizations, we have been considered a really reliable resource, a trusted resource. I think it's our job to make sure that momentum moves forward. I think that, the main thing that we're so good at is listening to our members. What are they concerned about? What are the impacts to their businesses, their processes? And so, making sure we have that right. That's what we're in the process of doing right now with our fall policy meetings. We'll continue to do that. And I think in some ways, being virtual, we're able to engage our members more, have those face-to-face interactions virtually with members of Congress and agency officials, and we'll continue to use that tool even when things get back to normal.
And last but not least, Kelly, what are some keys to success here?
Well, it's hard to go after two great answers of member engagement and education, but I would just say to the ABM members to keep taking care of business. I mean, looking after their employees that they've done so well through this crisis and beyond, making those delicious products that Americans and consumers all over the globe love. And ABA will be here to serve them as best we can and be their resource in Washington, D.C. and across the states.
That's a very hopeful answer. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Lee. Haley, do we have, as we wrap up, I know that we want to thank our guest here at the end again, but I know that we have the results are in from the latest Great Bake Debate. What was the question? How did it come out?
Yes. So our question last time was, do you prefer oatmeal cookies with raisins or chocolate chips? And the results were overwhelmingly for chocolate chips. 66% said chocolate chips, 16% said raisins, and 16% said white chocolate chips with cranberries. So I think that we really need to get this message out to all of our members to start making more oatmeal cookies with chocolate chips. You heard it here. And thank you again, Rob, Lee, and Kelly, because I know you guys are always so busy doing all this work on behalf of ABS members. So we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thank you. And a shout out to you, Haley, and to you, Katie. What a great medium, to get the message in a different way out to the members. And, I always look forward to the podcast. And frankly, whether I'm on it or not, it makes no difference. But, it's part of my morning walk routine. I love hearing the experts from the industry and the different perspectives. So big shout out to both of you for bringing this forward.
Well, thanks, Rob. And I really appreciate that. And I do think, especially right now, since we're not able to meet in person and have, a big gathering of the minds and our members like in DC talking about everything, we'll certainly have all that virtually. It's nice to have this as a way to have like an expertise roundtable, really focusing in on the issues that affect our members most. So thank you so much.
All right, and you can find more episodes just like this at baketothefuture.org. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, whether it's Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and Ghana. And take the Great Bake Debate from this episode at baketothefuture.org/debate.
Bake to the Future is brought to you by the American Bakers Association in partnership with Human Factor. To hear upcoming and past episodes, go to baketothefuture.org. Bake to the Future is produced by Haley Blumenreich. Audio engineer is Blake Alton. And A Slice of the Action is written by the American Bakers Association's Government Relations team.